go. My name's Todd.
And this is Cathy.
Welcome back to another episode of Zen Parenting Radio. This is podcast number, I'm not going to tell you. Want to know why?
Why?
Because I'm going to tell you a joke instead.
Oh, I want to hear it.
Why is 6 afraid of 7?
7, 8, 9.
That's what podcast number this is.
Nice. And I graduated in 1989.
And Taylor Swift was born in 1989.
These are many good things.
We have a title for this podcast, which we rarely do. We usually come up with a title after, but we decided to set an intention for this podcast. And we're doing that by knowing what the title is. Sweetie, share with the audience what the title is.
30 seconds. No, not seconds. 30 minutes of calm.
30 minutes. And I'm even using like my NPR radio voice. Do you hear that?
We did that naturally.
That's how we do it. We talk like this.
We're like, this is so calm.
This is very calm.
We need calm today.
I wish I would have pulled up a bunch of calm sounds, but
you can find them while I'm talking.
This is what I have on my soundboard. Jaws theme.
No, don't play that.
Evil laugh.
Nope.
Wah wah.
Nope.
Cash register.
Nope.
Backup. Booze.
No, that's loud in my ears.
All of them are pretty negative. So we're not gonna use it because it would not fit into the 30 minutes of calm. No. We are recording this on Saturday, November 2nd. It's going up on Tuesday, November 5th, which, if you're listening way after the fact, the election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is happening today. So we just decided that we wanted to bring some calm to what we're assuming.
Just in case people are standing in line voting and they just need some calm, or maybe they listen to this after the fact and they just want 30 minutes of calm. So let's do that. And on top of that, Todd and I are not going to try and like talk to you about the conference or my book or anything. We're just going to do 30 minutes of calm.
We're not going to buy anything, sell anything, process anything.
Sold or bought.
Just like Lloyd Dobler.
Thought about this quite a bit, sir, and I would have to say, considering what's waiting out there for me, I don't sell anything, buy anything, or process anything as a career. I don't want to sell anything bought or processed, or buy anything sold or processed, or process anything sold, bought, or processed, or repair anything sold, bought, or processed. You know, as a career, I don't want to do that.
Lloyd doesn't want to do that, sweetie.
And we don't want to do that today.
We're not selling anything other than calm.
Okay, so you watching the clock so we know when 30 minutes has come?
We're 2 minutes and 49 seconds.
We got a little time.
So we're literally going to press stop at 30 minutes, even if we're mid-sentence.
What if I've got a deep thought at 29:52?
Sorry, sweetie. I mean, you'll get 8 seconds of it.
Okay.
This is my study music.
Is it the beta waves?
It's study music, concentration, focus, meditation.
I do one with beta waves.
We should just have this in the background of our entire podcast in the same way they have the sound of the airplane in the movie Airplane. You can always hear the jets.
Right.
But that'll be distracting.
Very different situation.
Yeah.
Or should some we people just play music behind their podcast. I've heard people do that.
Just try this for a minute, see what happens, and continue with our podcast.
I'm not sure I'm going to like it.
Well, can I ask you a question first?
Sure.
Are we going to talk about your Zen parenting moment of optimism and?
Nope.
Okay, so that doesn't belong.
Nope, doesn't belong today.
So we talked a little bit about self-compassion.
Sure. Actually, that's I think where we should just dig in.
And before we dig in, why do we think it's important to practice self-compassion on a day like today?
Yeah, on any day where you're feeling like a little anxiety or overwhelm, or you're waking up to something big, it's a good opportunity to recognize why self-compassion can help you get back on. And when I say back on track, I don't mean more productive or anything. I mean, get you back online, because I think that's something that happens. And I will, you were just I just said, let's not talk about my Zen parenting moment. And I don't want to dig into the writing, but I did talk about, optimism and fear and how there's a paradox because they actually are interesting together. And sometimes when we're afraid, it, can push us to do something, and that can make us more hopeful about outcomes. Now, but to get from that fear to optimism, we need some self-compassion. There's a bit of a bridge there, because I know that when I get very fearful, I get stuck. I get paralyzed. I become like, some people are a fight, flight, fawn, I'm freeze.
Judy freezes it up.
I do. And I tend to like want to sit in a chair and just scroll or go on a walk and pretend nothing's going on. Or, I just get, the feelings are so much so that like even loud noises bother me. Like my whole body gets uncomfortable. And that stage or being afraid, this isn't a problem. The whole idea of self-compassion is not to avoid fear. Self-compassion is what can keep you online so you can keep taking steps forward. That's all.
Well, and it's funny. I on the spectrum of being walled off and firm boundaries, and on the opposite side of the spectrum is being spongy. And you're a little spongier than I am.
Correct.
Fair to say?
I think that we did a podcast a couple weeks ago about anxiety spirals. And I think that's more common for me. And I think what that looked like for me is just sometimes when I'm already in that place of where I'm anxious, it's hard for me to like get out of it. Right. Like I start to spin, and a few things it needs to happen. Either something significant needs to change in my life where like I don't feel that anxiety, or I need to go to bed, or I need to have someone help me talk through it, or I need to have a good cry. Like it can be challenging to get out of it. And so these practices that we're going to talk about right now that are very highly researched, and you've probably heard them before. I'm not always a fan of talking about the same thing over and over again. I like to bring in new ideas. But what I know for sure is that as much as I know about self-compassion, I talk about it all the time. I write about it. I teach my college students about it. Todd and I talk about it. And I still have to be a good practitioner. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to do it.
Well, and self-compassion falls right into that. So if I were going to categorize me, I'm probably more on the compartmentalized, more boundaried side, and you're on the more spongy side. And there's times when I'm like, I really wish I could feel more. And there's probably times where you're like, I wish I could just forget about this stuff the way Todd does.
Yeah, I wish I could compartmentalize a little better.
And that's the foundation for today of what self-compassion is. Instead of me wishing I were more like you,
right?
Can I radically accept myself for how my nervous system deals with things? Because I find myself sometimes being really wanting me to be different. And what's interesting is what's weird is the best path for me making those shifts towards feeling more is by radical self-acceptance. And I think what I usually do, and I will speak for what most people usually do is like, I wish I was different. And they just leap over it without really accepting where you are. And hold on, one more thing.
Okay.
And in my world, when I'm trying to make shifts around something, and this is from one of my teachers, it's awareness of what's happening and acceptance. And if I can make shifts from those places first, I'm more likely to make the shift.
Yes, I think I agree with every single thing you said.
Period, end of sentence.
No, I think the reason I took a breath is because this is not the case for all people. I think there's some people who are thinking just like you, but I'm less self-critical and I'm more wanting the outside world to change. So you're talking about you judging yourself.
Yeah.
And that's not real. I mean, sometimes, but think about me. I'm very rarely like, oh, I wish I was different. That's not my thing. Sometimes yes, sometimes I wish I could compartmentalize a little bit, but I'm more like, why are things the way they are? What could I be doing? How can I be changing this? Why don't people understand? There's an external issue, and that's what gets me into spirals.
Because you have no control over the outside world.
True. But thus the definition of a spiral is that you can know that. You can be like, I don't have control, and we can use all the data and I can show the circles of influence. And that doesn't mean you feel different.
Yet your nervous system still wants that control.
Correct. So for those of you listening, some of you may feel like Todd, that you're self-judgmental. I feel more frustrated with the external challenge or concerned about somebody else. Like sometimes my spirals are around, how can I help this person? Or I wish they weren't so sad, or how can I get them through this? And so it's very like, continuing on the path of like what Todd said, outside of my control, but I can't help but run it through my system. So I just want to give a little bit of an overview kind of off the top of my head about self-compassion research. So what I will say is that historically, like Kristin Neff is the person who began self-compassion research. There's so many people now who talk about it and who have duplicated results and have all sorts of, extenuating information when it comes to self-compassion. But it was born from, Kristin Neff. She is actually at the University of Texas, I believe, in Houston, because I think she and Brene Brown are in a similar area. But it came from her, trying to figure out, because she was not feeling self-compassionate. So it started with her feelings, but also about noticing the way that we interact, especially with our children, how there's a focus on a self-esteem movement. There used to be. This is, way back when, and I still think it's around, but maybe not as prominent. And what we focus on with self-esteem was making our kids feel good about who they are. Okay, that can sound good in theory, but really what it ended up becoming was, I will feel good if I get first place. I am important if I win. I will feel valued if I have the highest grade in the class. And you see how this can be a challenge, because there's no way every kid can have that experience, right? Or no way every human being can get, if we're talking about adults, not everybody can get the promotion. Not everybody can get the big, raise or bonus. Like, we're basically pitting ourselves against each other and playing king of the hill. And when we're king of the hill, we're so nervous about losing that position. That is our self-esteem really high, or are we actually kind of anxious about holding on to it? So these were some of the questions. Is self-esteem really helping us become better people? Is it really helping us in the long run? So that was part of it. And what she realized, cut to jumping to the reason here, is that she realized that self-compassion is actually the key to helping us be more connected, loving towards ourselves and others, more understanding from a parental role, more soothing to our kids rather than judgmental, more supportive rather than demanding. It shifted every aspect of how we interact with people when it comes to how we, what's the word I'm looking for? How we push ourselves or don't push ourselves, and actually recognize that acceptance is what allows us to succeed.
Can I read to you the 4 bullet points that Kristin Neff says regarding the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion?
Sure. I thought you were going to jump ahead, but
no.
Yes.
Self-esteem is a positive evaluation of self-worth, whereas self-compassion isn't a judgment or an evaluation at all. Okay. Number 2, self-esteem requires feeling better than others.
Right.
Self-compassion requires acknowledging that we are all imperfect. Third one is self-esteem tends to be a fair-weathered friend. There for us when we succeed, but deserting us precisely when we need it the most, when we fail or make a fool out of ourselves. And lastly, compared with self-esteem, self-compassion is less contingent on conditions like physical attractiveness or successful performance, provides a more stable sense of self-worth over time.
Yeah. So that last sentence is perfect. Stable sense of self-worth. And as parents, this is important to understand when our kids are struggling with something, is the whole idea of being hard on them and having them become afraid or using a lot of rules and regulations that actually can stifle them, that can actually decrease their sense of self, that can actually make them do what I do, which is freeze, versus having a self-compassionate way of interacting or personally dealing with our own challenges. That actually helps us keep moving. That's why Todd and I decided to talk about that today, on a day that, we can feel fear, or if you listen to this podcast later on, maybe a day you're struggling with, this is what helps. And this is, people push back on it, maybe less than they used to, but this is well researched. This is not us saying, doesn't this feel good? It's well researched. So, that's the big umbrella. And then now let's talk about what that looks like. What does self-compassion mean? Mm-hmm. And there's 3 components to it, and under each component, there's a lot to discuss, but the 3, we'll just start with number 1. Number 1 is self-kindness. Okay.
And what does that look like?
Self-kindness just means treating yourself like you treat a friend. We have this internal, voice that's often super, super, super judgmental. We all have it. This isn't a,
let's call it the inner critic.
Yeah. It's a very, very loud inner critic. And so there's in that there is we can all understand that and appreciate that. But then the question is, do we listen to it and believe it's correct? Do we believe that voice is the one that is actually going to influence us to do better? And what would we tell a friend if they were saying all these things like, I'm actually awful, or I'm horrible, or I'm not good at anything? What would we say to a friend? We'd say, oh my goodness, not at all. You had a tough day, or you made a poor choice, but there's a lot to learn, and we can move on from here. But we rarely do that with ourselves. It's like we believe that we should be kicking our own butt.
Well, yeah, we're believing the inner critic.
Right.
And we have two choices. We could either believe him or tell that one to shut up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really what we're talking about either, is can we accept that inner critic and know, because the harder you push that critic away, I think the more juice you give him.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, just to acknowledge, I see there you are. There's that critic.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for showing up. And now I'm going to direct my attention over here.
Yeah. Yeah. And Todd's saying him and I'll say her, or a gender neutral if we need to. It's whatever voice it is. It's whatever it sounds like. Correct. But yes, it's and I think this is where people get really stuck, because they have come to believe, either through the way that they were raised or the experiences that they somehow believe resulted from being hard on themselves. They think they got a positive outcome from it. They believe that if they are self-compassionate or practice self-kindness, then they'll be lazy and not get anything done. And the truth is, the only way to think clearly is to practice self-kindness. Because if you are in self-anger or self-judgment, your brain is not online. You're actually not functioning with all the systems.
Well, and we're going to go through all three, but eventually, if we have time, and we may not, there's a few things of self-compassion and what it's not. And one of those is what you just said.
Yes.
It's not that. So go ahead.
It's not, so you're not, people say that's me letting myself off the hook.
Yeah.
You actually have the capacity to learn and make different choices if you are being kind to yourself about what went wrong or the feelings you're having in the moment. Then you have some clarity of intention. If you're just, picture it like a cartoon, like you're beating your head. And you know how in cartoons, in the old violent cartoons us Gen Xers used to watch, and they would like beat them over the head and then they'd like become really small or go into the ground.
Yeah.
If you're doing that internally, look at what you're doing. You're pushing yourself down. You're not remaining whole. You're becoming smaller and more, it's more pain. Versus if you're actually looking and saying, okay, what happened there? Oof, that's not really my value system. That's not my integrity. I really want to make different choices. You have more ability to recognize what you did and do something different.
Cool.
So number 2, Todd, do you want to do that one or do you want me to?
Is it mindfulness?
Correct.
Okay. So my definition of mindfulness is being aware of what's going on in my body and around me without judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes interchange mindfulness and presence, like it's all kind of the same thing, but can I be aware? And, if I'm on my phone, it's hard to be aware. I mean, I guess there's times when you
that can be
aware.
A numbing out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's a simple practice, which you and I have talked about forever, of being mindful, being aware,
here,
focusing on your breath, focusing on where I am right now, as opposed to what's going to happen tomorrow or in 4 years or what happened yesterday or 25 years ago. Can I be here right now? And I also want to just say, this is a lifelong journey for me. Maybe there's some Buddhist monks out there that have figured it out and are mindful most of the time. Most of the time I'm not mindful. And can I be accepting of myself when I'm not mindful? It's funny, even like I'm not even meditating that much these days. I go in and out of meditation, but what's interesting is when I am meditating, and I find that I call it the sweet spot, when you are completely aware and you're not in your head at all. What happens to me is I realize that I'm in that sweet spot, which takes me out of that sweet spot. It's so interesting.
Which is part of it.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing is not, I'm in the sweet spot. Look how great I am. how can I stay here? It's, ooh, sweet spot. Ooh, I'm noticing the sweet spot. What you notice is how your brain works.
Yeah.
Like, I think the whole process is less about getting somewhere, even though I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like this really comfortable zone.
Yeah.
You know, I feel it, but I also think that it's natural because we've got all those parts in our brain to question it or to move us out of it really quickly.
Yeah.
And to your point, you can practice self-kindness with that. And I also think, you know, in a really practical way, like, you know, today you might be listening to this on Tuesday, but, you know, I've had days where I've been nervous or uncomfortable or whatever, like last Thursday, last Wednesday, whatever. And I've just had to say to myself, I'm just going to do Wednesday.
Yeah.
You know,
be here right now.
I'm just going to be here right now. You know, anybody who's waited on test results, anybody who has waited for a phone call that maybe they're scared about, anybody who has been waiting for their kid to come home and they can't track where they are, you know, you just have to be like, I'm just going to do right now. I'm just, and let me be clear. It doesn't mean your mind won't wander to scary things. It's about that you recognize that you don't have to stay there. I think that's the most important part of mindfulness, is this real life understanding of how to utilize it, is, you know, to not be judgmental when you're not mindful. Because some people will be like, oh, I can't believe I wasn't mindful in that situation. And then the mindfulness is getting turned against them. Like, there's a certain way to be, versus utilizing it in the moment. Like oftentimes when I can be more mindful after I've cried. Like, if I have a good cry, I can be like, okay, now I'm just going to be here. Almost like crying was like the release of tension about yesterday or tomorrow.
Well, what's interesting is, you know, like I said, this is really hard to do. Like, there's an election today. And if the person that, you know, we want Kamala, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course.
And you have had,
but I just wanted to not talk about it because people want to stay calm.
You've had moments of worry.
Of course.
And most of the worry, you know, it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And it's silly for me to be like, oh, well, what are you worrying about? Nothing has happened yet.
Correct.
And even that for me is, I am, you know, in an effort to try to calm you down, I take myself out of presence. So it's so much easier for me to say, sweetie, it hasn't even happened yet. Don't worry about it. And meanwhile, I'm worried about what is life going to be like if this happens. And it's like, whenever anybody tells somebody to take a breath, I always say, the person who ever says to take a breath, think of your kid. Your kid's melting down. Just take a breath. What really needs to happen is I need to take a breath. So anyways.
True. And, you know, I think that there is a lot of wisdom in that. And I think there is also a natural part of being human where you try and prepare mentally to not be completely sideswiped by something. There's a gray zone in there, meaning there's the extremes of, I'm not going to think about this at all, and this is all I'm going to think about. And then the middle ground is, how will I take care of myself if? What resources do I have if?
Yeah.
How will I soothe myself if? And I think those are healthy. I don't think that's not being mindful.
Yeah, you can plan mindfully.
You can plan mindfully. Exactly.
But you can also lose yourself to the planning.
Correct. That's the binaries that I'm talking about. Right. There's the complete disregarding, and then there's the ridiculous, like, you know, hyperventilating. I've been that person, like, not necessarily this year, but when I used to leave the kids, when I'd like have to go on a trip but when I choose to go on a trip with my friends, which I think as a new mom is really important, by the way, once a year, or, you know,
or maybe 2 or 3 times a year.
Well, I don't think I did, but I know I did it once a year.
No, you didn't.
And before I'd go, I mean, I had little kids who were maybe nursing or bottle fed or whatever, or were just really small, or maybe they had a first day of something and I didn't want to miss it. And a few times I hyperventilated. Sure. It was so hard. Like, someone gave me a bag because I
thought that one of our kids, and by the way, we have 6 minutes left in this podcast.
We got to do the last one.
But you thought our kid who was nursing at the time was going to starve,
not eat,
to death.
Right. Which is me at the extreme, you know, like, which there's a lot of mom brain in that, which is my whole sense of being is about keeping these children safe and alive. And, you know, that's a whole nother topic. Last one, Todd, because we got 6 minutes.
Yeah. Common humanity.
It's my favorite one. It's my most soothing one. because part of my internal monologue is that I'm alone. Even when I'm with people, I'm like, I'm alone. It's a very childhood thing. And when I realize how many people, not just in my presence, but are everywhere, all over the place, all over the country, all over the world, potentially, who have a similar desire. I said to Todd this morning that for a day like today, an election day, just realizing how many people who we feel connected to because they want something similar. And I am so not alone. We can feel alone. We can be scared within our own home or for our own, the potential loss of something. Like, there are individual aspects to this, but the truth is there are people everywhere who are sending out that same vibe, and we're just not alone in this process. And anybody who has gone through something, take it off of the election for a second. You've had a situation where you've made a mistake or someone hurt you or you've done something embarrassing. You're not alone. You're not the only one. You're simply not.
And our brain tries to convince us that we are.
Right.
Why does we're unique? Why does the brain do that?
Well, I think there's an ego aspect to it, that we are unique. I think there is the voice of the judgmental voice. I think it's like a few different parts of us coming together to sabotage. Like, you are the only one, the ego part. And there's something inherently wrong with you, which is the judgmental part. And there's just this whole, rotating voices telling us that nobody would love us if they knew these things. And then the other part is belonging, right? Like, we sometimes fear if we have a certain perspective or we have a certain history or we have a certain belief system or whatever, we won't belong. And that's the scariest thing for human beings, because belonging is how we survive. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of different pieces in there, Todd, depending on who you are. But so that would be self-kindness today, mindfulness today, even if it's just reminding yourself that, to just be here now. And the last one is common humanity. Remember, you're not alone.
Yeah. So we do have 2.5 minutes left. Oh. So we can either go over a few of these things that it's not, or I could just play some calm meditation music for 2 minutes. And if people want to flip over to their next podcast, they can, or they can just.
Why don't you just read one or two things real quick and then put on the calming music? Why don't we?
So yeah, I'll just read through the bullet points real quick. And you already hit on one of them. Doesn't self-compassion just mean throwing a pity party for poor me?
Right. Which is no, of course not, because you actually, then again, when you practice self-compassion, you have the capability to keep walking forward.
Self-compassion is for wimps. I have to be tough and strong to get through my life.
No, practicing self-compassion is one of the most challenging things you can do. It's actually a strength. And there's a certain amount of consciousness and, stability that is required to even make the choice to go forward.
I need to think more about other people, not myself. Being self-compassionate is way too selfish and self-focused.
The ability to practice self-compassion indicates how compassionate you'll be toward other people. So without self-compassion, it's very difficult to not be judgmental of others. So it is what you give to yourself, you end up giving to others.
Self-compassion will make me lazy. I will probably just skip work whenever I feel like it and stay in bed eating chocolate chip cookies all day.
No, that's called denial and compartmentalization, or just numbness. Self-compassion is actually a practice and a process that actually keeps you up and running.
2 more. If I am compassionate to myself, I'll let myself get away with murder. I need to be hard on myself when I mess up to make sure I don't hurt other people.
Self-compassion is actually what keeps your brain open and creative, especially the prefrontal cortex, where you can actually see through a different lens and you can actually be more rational about what we could do differently versus being super judgmental or cruel to ourselves. Shuts all of that down and we have no ability to do anything different.
I'm going to skip the last one because it's a little wordy.
Okay.
So I'm just going to, for the last 35 seconds, we're just going to say thanks.
Okay.
For being a part of it.
And we'll talk to you next week.
Where's my self-compassion? Can I be compassionate with myself?
With the inability to play music?
Yeah, it's just not working.
So
I'm going to go ahead and...
Do you want me to sing?
Yeah, sing. Sweetie, give us a little song.
No, I don't know if that would be compassionate to others.
No, probably not.
I like to sing in the car. And in the shower.
The shower. So we have 8 seconds left. So thank you for listening to Zen Parenting Radio, and hopefully enjoyed 30 minutes of calm.
Okay.